So Marissa, you spent 15 years working at the top tech giants Google and Facebook, and you just published a book, Lean Out, as a contrast to the popular female leadership tome, Lean In, by Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook's COO. You decided to write this partly because you felt that the perspective on female leadership skews towards telling women that in order to advance on the corporate ladder, they need to behave more like men.
To lean in books of that nature, really paying the blame for the gender gap on stereotypes and culture and women, frankly, and their prescriptions for success hinge on women adopting sort of these more male behaviors. But I believe that men and women want different things at work, and that's okay. Instead of dismissing women's wants and needs as a product of cultural oppression, I think we should listen to them and take them seriously and figure out what is it about the corporate structure that needs to change in order to better meet the needs of women. I mean, I asked this question in the book, but what makes more sense? Rewiring women to conform to a system or rewiring the system to better meet their needs?
Definitely. In the book, you cite a survey that shows that 36% of men aspire to be CEOs, compared with just 18% of women. And yet there's such an emphasis in the corporate structure to move up and take on more responsibility. How do you think that the way that corporations are structured is sort of a disservice to women because there's such a push to get to the top?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily that it's the structure doesn't work because it pushes them to take more responsibility. I think that it offers little meaning to many women, and so much of it is power games and politics and BS, frankly, that especially after, and not just moms, but especially after women become moms, with their time squeezed and their energy scarce, your patience for that stuff becomes so low. And when you go to work, you want to do meaningful work, and in a lot of corporate organizations, there's actually little opportunity for that.
Mm-hmm. At Google, if you haven't had a promotion in 5 years, you're seen as lacking ambition. In the book, you mentioned that you didn't want a promotion because you liked the creative work you were doing, and you preferred that over supervising people. So what did you want from your career instead?
So I wanted to do work that was meaningful to me and leverage the kind of talent that I bring to the table instead of having to act in ways that were required by the system in order to get ahead. So once you pass a certain salary, the only thing left motivating people to climb higher and higher is power. Right. And research is pretty clear on the fact that not everybody is motivated by these formal positions of authority. Right. And it's something we learn in kindergarten, right? Everybody likes different things, but for some reason, when it comes to the workforce, we don't embrace that.
A point that you made in the book that I loved is that the idea that women should aspire to more male-centric traits like being direct, being assertive, pins the blame for the gender gap squarely on women because it sets men up as the norm, and this is what we need. The benchmark, exactly. So do you think these traits like you mentioned, listening, empathy, emotional intelligence, do you think these are excessively associated with women at the moment? And do you think they'll ever truly be seen as advantageous in the corporate world?
Yeah, so if you read most modern business and management books, so many of them stress these female dominant qualities like empathy and listening is like the future of business, especially because we're in a knowledge economy, and so intellect, imagination, all of that is fueled by things like empathy. The corporations, large ones, they're all structured as zero-sum competitions. It's things like aggression and putting your needs ahead of others that are what's needed to win.
Right.
And these are exactly the opposite of empathy and cooperation. So as long as we structure these organizations as zero-sum games and competitions, then things like empathy and listening will just always be a disadvantage when it comes to getting ahead.
And I wonder if you think that that's a product of who's at the top at the moment and how people have traditionally climbed to the top. And if that is the case, should we still continue to push women to aspire towards higher positions so that they're represented?
I think women should be encouraged to do what they want to do. And I think in some ways, saying that they should represent 50% of all CEOs in this country is sort of arbitrary. And worse than that, it compromises some of their well-being. So for example, like going back to that statistic, only 18% of women aspire to a C-level position. So
Right.
if closing the gender gap requires them to work jobs they don't want for longer hours, to play more office politics, and it reduces the quality of their life, like how can we call that a win? 10% or less of nurses are men. Is a nurse less important to society? I mean, these are all just value judgments.
Right.
And it's a value judgment we only place on women.
Yeah.
And one thing with Lean In, there's this idea in there, the leadership ambition gap, that women don't aspire to be leaders. But that's also, that language is very misleading because a corporate executive is not synonymous with a leader.
Right.
There's so many different kinds of leaders, and one I talk about in the book, like Martin Luther King, he didn't have a C-level position at a Fortune 500 company. He wasn't, even the president or in the Senate, but look at the influence and the power that he wielded in this world.
You coined your own version of the leadership ambition gap, where I think it was called the domestic
Yeah.
ambition gap,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So one of the big goals of modern feminism is women should run half our businesses and half our homes.
Right.
Well, that means men need to run half our homes. Why? And they don't. And everybody knows that they do fewer chores and they spend less time child rearing and all that stuff. Nobody comes along and says, oh, men are victim of cultural stereotypes that make them not want to be around the kids and do all these domestic chores. We all say they should, but there's no effort to really reverse their cultural conditioning, supposedly,
Yeah.
or really trying to get them involved. I say if there's a leadership ambition gap, there's also then a domestic ambition gap. And it's just another example of being so relentlessly focused on women as the source and the solution to everything.
Absolutely. But you spent 11 years at Google before you joined
13.
Facebook.
Yeah.
13 years?
Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned there was an off-site team building meeting where every employee was assigned a color based on their personality. Yours was earth green because you enjoy helping other people and building harmony. And you said the opposite to that was fiery red, which are these people who are competitive and they like being in control.
So it's getting groups by color. And when we did that, I kind of looked over at the red side and I asked the woman leading the exercise, who was an HR business partner of Google, what the color of our senior executive team was at that organization. And it turned out like 9 out of 10 were red.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that example because it's such a jarring and visual representation of the types of bias that happen in choosing who gets to become a leader. And you also mentioned this completely changed your ideals of diversity.
Yeah, it gave me an entirely new perspective on what diversity actually means, because we talk so much about why diversity is good for businesses, and what we say is diversity of thought and perspective and experience, and that the reason diversity is good for the bottom line is because you're bringing together this variety of personality types and perspectives and experience and all that stuff. But if you have an executive board and 10 of them, and there's 10 people, 5 are women, but all 10 are red, is that really the kind of diversity that we're after? It's the opposite. It's very myopic, and
Right.
you end up having the same profile of winners at the top of these large organizations.
I wonder if also on the flip side, it could be argued that those who want control, those who want competition, why don't we let them have it?
Right, but they do have it, right?
Right.
So they
Yeah.
have it all they want, right? They
Right.
run these corporations, and in order for somebody to win a promotion, somebody has to lose. It pits people against each other, especially in the corporate world where it's so hard to tell who's doing a good job. People fight over credit. It's really sort of toxic for certain personality types, like greens, like me, right?
Yeah.
So the question really is, why can't people who prefer collaboration and to focus on relationships, why can they have what they want?
But it's often said in politics that if you want your specific needs and interests to be represented in the policy agenda, you need to have someone who looks like you or shares your views in a position of power. So how do we fix this male-centric corporate power dynamic if we don't have women in positions of power?
So I think it's an interesting assumption that I've never seen proven, that if you do have women in positions of power, that they make decisions in the best interests of women. Because I partially started writing this whole thing, I was inspired by it because I didn't see women in positions of power actually really care about helping other women. I mean, I saw lots of women who would get on stage and talk about it, but knowing them personally, some of them hated other women.
Right.
And there was this phoniness to it. So I think I really question the assumption that everybody just makes, that if there were more women at the top, that they would do better by women. For everyone, you know, being at Facebook, that was the hardest experience of my life, and I really saw firsthand that it was feminist theater for the most part. So, one, I question the assumption. Two, I think that it goes back to our definition of power and success, because I'm not in the corporate world anymore. I was there for 15 years. I worked with two of the best companies in the world. I had an incredibly wonderful, lucrative salary. Now I make like nothing. I just, you know, spent my whole life savings working on this book. I've never felt more powerful. There's different ways people wield power, and we have to stop associating the male worldview of power with power in general. That, you know, women are the invisible heroes of this world. We wield tremendous power, but it gets undermined when we are so focused on comparing it to the way men behave.
Yeah, and Lean Out is sort of an antithesis to, you know, the popular book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook COO.
The moment that sparked sort of the fuel that really pushed me to finish writing it was a woman who had bullied me at Facebook for a year and a half, relentlessly. It was the worst experience of my life. She was on stage with Sheryl, and they were discussing female empowerment. And the woman who had bullied me went on about all the things she does to support women. It was just so phony, and it was so not real, and it enraged me, not just because, you know, it happened to me and she was, you know, secretly like torturing me, but as somebody who's always been passionate about helping women, the phoniness of it enraged me. If we really want to change things, we have to be honest about what is going on here, because anytime I tell that story, women come up to me by the droves after to tell me they've had a similar experience. So that's actually part of what I really want to accomplish with this book, which is to inject some truth and honesty into the conversation.
And with the book, you know, you're trying to put forward sort of a future or something, a new paradigm for us to aspire to. How would you describe that?
I think we need to stop measuring women against men on the dimensions of money and power. And when I say power, actually, I mean corporate executive titles. One of the things I suggest in the book is to start measuring well-being instead of winning. And that not only allows us to be more honest about what it is that contributes to our well-being, but it kind of democratizes feminism in a kind of way, because there's so many other women that need help, more so than sort of people we've been focused on in the past 10 years. Closing the gender gap is not the most effective way to help women. There's just so many low-income women that need help with childcare and live below, you know, poverty lines. Like, these are women that really need help. And if we measure well-being, those are the women that we would help and measure, because we're focused on winning. You know, our resources go to places I'm not sure are most effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love that you're bringing this up now, because today's generation is known for sort of rejecting the 9-to-5, the rigidity of it. They want to travel more, they want to experience more, they want flex working.
Yeah.
So how do you think that that's sort of helping to ferry this message along, this movement?
Yeah, it's a great question. While the system is broken, systems are really hard to change, and they take a really long time. So you should focus on what you can control. And one of those things is being honest about who you are and what you want, and representing those needs at work. And you can't always be so honest about it because it affects your livelihood. But I think part of that is if you can get honest about what you need and want at work, then maybe that will puts pressure on the system to change. So instead of depending on powerful people to make these broad, sweeping changes, perhaps it will come from the bottom up, and people putting pressure on the system to have it deliver things that are that better meet their needs.
Do you have any advice for women who are frustrated in their careers, and are looking for support, guidance, what advice would you give?
Yeah.
And especially the women who are perhaps not in positions of power, the doers, you know, like you were at Facebook and Google.
I think the first thing is getting honest with yourself and doing the internal work to figure out what it is that you want, right? It took me a really long time to figure that out. And it's a journey. So I think it really starts understanding who you are and what brings meaning to your life and what kind of needs that you have. And then recognizing that our institutions, as they're designed today, aren't equipped to meet a lot of our needs. And that's okay, because that gives the power back to us to figure out how to fulfill those needs on our own, which is really the definition of empowerment. And I just want to make it clear that lean out doesn't mean quit your job or reduce your ambition or take your foot off the pedal. It just means leaning out of anyone else's story for who you should be and what your career should look like. And it's really just about defining success on your own terms.